Welcome to a Video Game Mania Special Edition. To go behind the scenes and walkthrough of arcade and pinball machines. Today's special edition is the Florida Arcade and Pinball Exposition in 2012 at the Mardi Gras Casino.
Don't stop till you're sweaty. Here we go. 1, 2, are you ready? What? Show the stuff on the dance floor is where you need to be. Don't say nothing, just listen to G. Try the styles, I know that you can fit them. Everybody in here, step to the rhythm. Step to the rhythm, step to the rhyme. 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 Step.
You gotta take the very first step if you wanna get.
In the next 50 minutes, we will interview with some people and have fun with those pinball machines. And we have an opportunity to experience pinball history. Plus a bunch of passwords from the TurboGrafx 16 game Devil's Crush and a video game review of Pinball Hall of Fame, the Williams Collection. And now, here's Mike.
Hi everybody, Mike here, and welcome to the special edition of Video Game Mania. And today, we're going on an awesome tour of the Florida Arcade and Pinball Exposition here at Mardi Gras Casino. And soon, you're gonna love the way we hear, because we're gonna see old and new pinball machines and some arcade machines that'll blow your minds out. So, here we go.
So I'd like to know where you got the notion. Said I'd like to know where you got the notion.
Pinball games. So many pinball games, so little time. Old and new. You know, we see where we are. Aha, here's the classic game, New World.
Before we go explore it, let's take a look at pinball history. It all started at the turn of the 17th century in the countryside England. A game called 9 Holes was gaining popularity. 9 holes were played outdoors, where players would roll 6 balls into various scoring holes dug into the ground. Soon, the French adopt 9 holes game called acoustic, which was played indoors. The French called this indoor 9 holes game bagatelle. The difference between bagatelle and its English predecessor 9 holes was the introduction of wooden pegs located around the various scoring holes at the top of the playing board, and it became popular in Europe. And bagatelle was sent to the United States.
Bagatelle was very popular throughout the United States during the mid-1800s. This political cartoon depicts Abraham Lincoln and his cabinet playing a leisurely game of bagatelle. Meanwhile, the English had come up with their own unique version of bagatelle, and it was called cockamaroo. The significance of this English gambling game was the introduction of shooting lanes on the far left and far right sides of the board. Another interesting aspect of cockamaroo was the use of immediate on-site scoring capabilities through the use of these scoring troughs. In America, a game called Tivoli became the Americanized bagatelle board. The popularity of Tivoli grew fast, and in no time at all, it was popping up in bar rooms and saloons across America. By the 1860s and 70s, as saloons and gambling parlors began to sprout up across the United States, American inventors, manufacturers, and game makers were entering the gaming market at an astounding pace. Meanwhile, with its dual-channel ball introduction lanes, pins, pegs, and scoring troughs, Tivoli would remain popular in the U.S. until the early 1900s. One of the single most important patents in pinball's history was issued to Montague Redgrave of Cincinnati, Ohio. His invention, the ball shooter, known today as the plunger. Redgrave has been called the father of American pinball, and this is his game, improvements in bagatelle. Montague Redgrave would never realize the true significance of his invention, for what he had created was the first true pinball machine. Redgrave's wonderful new game with its bells and spring-loaded plunger was very popular indeed. Redgrave's game did very well in the gaming market from the 1880s until the early 1900s. Almost everything in the world of coin-operated games and arcade devices seemed to be coming out of Chicago around the turn of the century. In the late 1920s, a young entrepreneur named David Gottlieb was traveling the American Southwest. As a distributor of punch cards and test-your-grip machines, he realized the opportunities available in the budding coin-operated amusements industry. David Gottlieb was about to make pinball history. In 1931, Gottlieb introduced a machine that would generate a wave of excitement that is still felt to this day. Baffle Ball was the world's first mass-produced and mass-marketed pinball machine. And David Gottlieb was about to become a very wealthy young man.
Ballyhoo was a countertop mechanical game with operational legs released in 1931. Ballyhoo was the first coin-operated pinball game and was invented by the founder of the Bally Corporation, Raymond Maloney. Pinball became so popular in the 1930s.
So, by 1946, the stage was set. The major players that would hold dominance for the next 30 years were in place. Williams Manufacturing, D. Gottlieb and Company, and Bally. Of the big three, only Gottlieb would stick almost solely to the making of pinball machines. Bally would expand into slots, horse racing machines, rifle arcade games, and bowling shuffle games. Williams expanded into other arcade games as well. The war was over, and the public demand for pinball was still on the rise. Then in 1947, something happened. Something that would change pinball forever. Aside from the humorous Humpty Dumpty character seen falling off the wall on this 1947 Gottlieb game Humpty Dumpty, the player also saw something that he had never seen before. It was called the flipper, and pinball was never going to be the same. You might guess that the first flipper game would have a pair of flippers, but Humpty Dumpty had 6. Gottlieb originally called them flipper bumpers, and even Gottlieb himself wasn't sure whether they would be accepted or not. The flipper was invented by Harry Mabs. It was not a whole lot different from the bats used on the popular baseball games which began to sprout up in the 1930s. Nudging the machines, as was the common practice of pinball players before the flipper came onto the scene, was replaced by the art of ball control that this wonderful new device now offered. Before the flipper, the player could do nothing to fight the laws of gravity. Now, he could. There was a lot of experimentation during the early days of the flipper. While Humpty Dumpty had 6, some had 4, or even just 1. In the beginning, flippers were placed in a completely opposite manner on the playing field than they are today. They were backwards. It would not be until the mid-1950s that the pinball industry would universally adopt flipper positioning in the way that we are accustomed to seeing it today. Another aspect of pinball that has always gotten the players' palms sweatier and hearts beating faster is the lighting up of the special. Originally introduced to pinball in the late 1930s, the special when lit was, and is still today, a hard-won reward for the player's skill. In most cases, After a sequence of targets or other playing field scoring objectives have been met, the player has an opportunity to win a free game. Sometimes this opportunity is a very brief one, because in most cases, the special lights up on the last ball, which adds even more drama to the game. You can see it, hear it, and in most cases, you can feel the crack of the solenoid as it kicks in when the free game is achieved. Two other very notable innovations that would bring much more speed to pinball came in the 1950s. These are kicking rubbers, and these are pop bumpers, known to many as thumper bumpers. When the ball made contact with a bumper, it would now be propelled outward with a powerized thrust, allowing the ball to hit other targets on the playing field. The thumper bumper was introduced originally by David Gottlieb in 1950 as cyclonic bumpers, soon to be renamed as kicking bumpers. Coupled with a new flipper, these two welcome additions made pinball a much faster and more exciting game. During the 1950s, score tallying was beginning to change from projected light scoring to a new and soon-to-be permanent replacement, the scoring reel. Backglass artists of the time were particularly pleased because the original columns of projected scores were now gone, giving them more space to work their creative genius. Speaking of scoring, as was often the case when an established score was attained, the player would win a free game. But what if a player failed to achieve the necessary scoring to win the credit, or further still, could not light up the special when lit? Well, up until the mid-1950s, the player had no chance to win at all. Which brings us to this. On a 1957 Gottlieb game called Royal Flush, the player was finally granted one more chance to win. What Gottlieb had established back in '57 was then, and is still today, one of the most exciting elements of pinball. In matching, if the last digit or last two digits in the final score match with a randomly selected backglass illuminated number, then the player wins a free game. Original matching looked and sounded something like this. Today, matching is more popular than ever before, due to the more elaborate and sophisticated ways that manufacturers display the match to the player. As you can see, some are pretty wild.
Going to the moon.
Gentlemen, it's been a privilege flying with you.
Something else new and exciting began coming to pinball during the 1950s. The emergence of the animated backglass.
Coming up next, more pinball history and scoring as Video Game Mania Special Edition comes right back.